Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. Very good Erev Shabbat. Just a personal opinion, but you all know I'm never wrong. About the comments that were made regarding Israel and the government and the policies in the United States Senate. So I thought to myself, that was Haman's big mistake. Haman didn't have Jews. If he would have had Jews that would have spoken to for him, he would have had it. He tried to do it without Jews. You can't do it without Jews. And tragically, there always are Jews. That being said, I feel better. In this week's concluding Parsha of Chumash Shmos, Moshe Rabbeinu describes for us all of the artifacts of the Mishkan, everything that was constructed, and the clothing that was woven that the Kohanim, and especially the Kohen Gadol, Aaron, would wear. So we all know that there are 4 basic garments: the tunic, the shirt, and the trousers, and the belt, and the hat that all the Kohanim wear. In addition, the Kohen Gadol wore 4 more garments. And they were the tzitz, the golden plate that he wore on his forehead, and the ephod, the apron that he wore, that was so special, and the choshen, which was the breastplate upon which the names of the tribes of Israel were engraved, and everyone had their own precious stone. And then finally the long coat that he wore, the me'il, which had bells and pomegranates at the bottom, at the hem. So there's a halacha that a Kohen cannot perform service in the temple if he is mechusar begodim, if he does not have the requisite amount of clothing upon him. So that means the regular Kohen, the Kohen Hedyot, had to have 4 garments, and if he did not have them, then it was he could not serve. And the Kohen Gadol had to have another 4, the 8 garments that signified he was the Kohen Gadol. But the Torah adds another thing. It's not a garment, and in halacha, it's not a necessity for the Kohen Gadol to have it. In fact, we will see that for a large period of Jewish history, practically all through the Second Temple period, 400 years, the Kohen Gadol did not have this extra garment, so to speak. And yet, since he had Shmona Begodim, since he had the 8 garments that were necessary, the trousers and the belt and the hat, etc. So the Kohen Gadol was kosher. He could perform the service. This extra piece of the puzzle, Moshe says, "V'nosata shoma es Urim V'Tumim." You will place with the choshen, with the breastplate, something that's called the Urim and Tumim. So the Talmud naturally asks, what did the Urim and Tumim look like? What was it? What did it consist of? So the main conclusion of the Gemara is that there was a...
Recording in progress.
That there was a flap made out of the material of the ephod that was attached to the choshen, and that when you folded that flap over on itself, it formed a pocket. And in the pocket, they inserted a parchment that had the Shema Meforosh, the ineffable name of God, written upon it. And that piece of parchment with the name of God written upon it activated the Urim V'Tumim. The Gemara says Urim is because it lit up the letters that were on the choshen. So the Gemara says how it was that it had the name of the tribe, and then it had the name Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So all the letters of the alphabet were present on the choshen. So the Urim lit them up, and the Tumim explained them. So what happened here? So the Tanakh teaches us that when the Jewish people had a serious question of policy, shall we go to war or not? Shall we enforce this decree or not? What shall we do? So the king or the shofet, or whoever was the leader of the people, came before the Kohen Gadol, and he asked the question, should we go up or not? And the letters on the choshen lit up. Cain, lo. Now, later. And the Navi, or the spiritual leader of the people, was able to interpret the letter that were illuminated, and that became the answer. So the Urim V'Tumim is not a garment. It's not one of the garments that the Kohen Gadol has to wear, but it is a tool. It's something that's given to the Kohen Gadol, and because of that, the Jewish people would know how to behave, and the correct policy would follow. Now, the Urim V'Tumim existed, as I mentioned, throughout the time period of the Shoftim, throughout the period of David HaMelech, throughout the period of Shlomo, and throughout the period of the First Temple. In the Second Temple, it was no longer present. So the Gemara asks, what was the level of prophecy, so to speak, of the Urim V'Tumim? To a certain extent, how reliable was it? Part of the problem is because it's subject to human interpretation. So maybe they interpreted wrong. They saw what letters lit up, but they spelled it differently. So the Gemara says that the Urim V'Tumim was at a higher level than prophecy, than Nevuah. But it was at a lower level than revelation. However, we'll understand that. But it's a higher level than mere prophecy. And that made it more reliable. Especially, a prophet can come and say, 150 years from now, this is going to happen. So if the prophet is a trustworthy prophet, a Novi Emes, so we believe him, even though nobody will be around 150 years from now to see it. So we can't prove him wrong, but we can prove him right. The Urim V'Tumim was instantaneous. They asked the question, go to war or not go to war? You had to answer now. You couldn't say, well, in 50 years we're going to, well, now, what's the answer? So therefore, it's obvious why Chazal held that the Urim V'Tumim was greater than prophecy, because it could be checked immediately. It gave immediate answers. A prophecy, many times, we are still waiting for certain prophecies to be fulfilled, even though we have immense belief in the truth of the prophecy. So, the conclusion of Chumash Shmos deals with the Urim V'Tumim, that the Jewish people had this gift from heaven that enabled them to make correct decisions. We live in a time there's no Urim V'Tumim and there's no prophecy, and we see how difficult it is to come to any sort of answer that satisfies us. What shall we do? Make the deal, don't make the deal. Stand up, give up, what? I don't know what to do, that's the problem. But when we had the Urim V'Tumim, so that problem more or less could be settled. We have a tradition in Jewish life that when we finish a book of Torah, or we finish one of the volumes of the Talmud or Mishnah, we create what is called a siyum. You mean to end it properly. And the tradition always was in the rabbinic world that at the siyum, the rabbi or the teacher or the Rosh Yeshiva delivered what was called a hadran. A hadran was a review of the entire book. He tied the beginning of the book to the end, so that the people would realize that they had to look at the whole book and not just cherry pick which verses they wanted and what appeals to them. And there are entire volumes of rabbinic literature, of hadranim, of these types of lessons that were taught that bind the beginning to the end. Some of them are very logical and almost self-apparent. Others are more fanciful, require greater imagination. But that was always the tradition. So tomorrow in Shul, we're going to make a siyum on Chumash Shmos, the second of the 5 books of the Chumash. So what's the beginning and what's the end? And do they have any connection? At first blush, they have no connection whatsoever. But if we look at it more deeply, we'll see that there is a connection. How does Chumash Shmos start? With Moshe Rabbeinu. How he is saved as an infant. He grows up in the house of the Pharaoh. He defends his people. He is forced to flee. Disappears for 60 years. There are all sorts of midrashim as to what he did in the 60 years. We don't know. He reappears at the age of 80. And at the story of the burning bush, there's a conversation between him and Kaviochel with heaven that lasts a week, according to the Wein Parsha. And God tells him, go and speak to Paro and redeem the Jewish people. Moshe said, honey, what are you talking about? Not me. I'm not willing to go. Now Moshe gives all sorts of excuses. Kvad peh, kvad loshon anochi. I don't speak well. I'm not persuasive. But the Meforshim say this is all a cover for his real reason for not going. His real reason for not going is because he doesn't want to bring any sort of aggravation to his brother Aaron. Aaron was the leader of the Jewish people in Egypt. He stayed with them in all of their troubles. He was the one that was beloved beyond belief. So Moshe says, Shlach no biyad tishlach. Send Aaron. You don't have to send me, send Aaron. Until at the end of 7 days, the Lord tells him, I don't want to hear this anymore. Yeah, I'm not interested in your excuses. Lech, go, do it. And then Moshe succumbs, and he appears before Pharaoh. We know the rest of the story. The Bali Musar, the great Lithuanian psychiatrist of the Jewish people, looked at this medrash and looked at this occasion, and they came to the conclusion that had Moshe gone right away, God would have said, no, I'm not taking you. It's only because he refused and sincerely refused, that somehow, eventually God forced him into it. It's very interesting. You know, there's a medrash that says, the prophet Yeshayahu has a vision. He's in heaven. And he hears a voice that says, Esmi yeshlach umi yelech lanu. Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? In other words, who wants to be the prophet for the Jewish people? And Yeshayahu answers, Hineni shlacheni, I'm going. Send me. And then the Tanakh tells us that an angel comes with a burning coal and burns his lips. So most Mefarshim learned that he burned his lips because he said a negative thing about the Jewish people. He said, Am tmeis v'sayim. I live amongst the people that is, their lips are impure. Heaven doesn't want to hear criticism of the Jewish people. You have something to say about the Jewish people, say it to them. Don't say it in heaven. But there is an opinion that somehow his lips were burned because he immediately said, I'm the one, send me. There has to be a reticence in assuming such a position of responsibility. And because of the fact that that was not, so he was punished. You know, there's a famous story, I've told it many times, that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said to his disciple, Rabbi Yitzchak Blaser, Rabbi Yitzchak Petterberger, that he wants him to go to St. Petersburg to be the rabbi there. Then St. Petersburg was, the only Jews who could live in St. Petersburg were assimilated Jews. A wealthy class that had connections with the Tsarist government.
Recording in progress.
But Yisrael told him to go. So he said to him, he said, Rebbe, I'm afraid to go. I'm afraid to go to St. Petersburg. Who knows what will happen with me? And Rabbi Yisrael answered him, whom shall I send? Someone that's not afraid. So we always have that in the back of our mind. That's what the Balei Musar meant, that if Moshe would have gone right away, God wouldn't have taken him. He could only take someone that feels that somehow he cannot hurt his brother. And he's not willing to do so. So that's the beginning of the Chumash Shmos. The end of the Chumash Shmos is that his brother Aaron is given these 8 wonderful garments to wear, and he is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest of Israel, and he is greater than Moshe, because Moshe is a Nofi, is a prophet, whereas he is the Urim V'Tumim, which is greater than prophecy. so that Moshe realizes the wisdom of heaven. And he realizes that even though he was correct in not trying to honor his brother, heaven is ultimately correct because it raises his brother to a level greater than prophecy. It gives him the Urim V'Tumim. So one of the problems that we had in the Second Temple, from which we should learn lessons, is that the position of the Kohen Gadol, people bought it. They corrupted the process. They wanted to be the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara says there were hundreds of Kohanim Gedolim, none of them passed a year. It was a certain death sentence, so to speak. But yet, everybody wanted to be the Kohen Gadol. Figured, not me, not going to happen to me. So therefore, there could be no Urim V'Tumim. The Urim V'Tumim only comes when there's reticence. So we find that by Shaul HaMelech. He became the king because he hid. David HaMelech became the king because everybody said, who, what, where? Once reticence is lost, and it becomes ego, so then the Urim V'Tumim cannot function. It just doesn't exist anymore. So that's the connection between the beginning of the Chumash and the end of the Chumash. That the Torah wants to teach us the power of reticence, of modesty. And we have a halacha like that, that if the Gabbai comes and asks you to daven for the Yomid, you're allowed to refuse twice. Only if he asks you a third time do you have to go. I remember I had someone in my shul that used to love to daven, and the Gabbai would ask him, okay, Joe, go daven. So he'd say, ask me again. But there's something to that. There's something to this idea that the Urim V'Tumim, the magic of heaven, only exists when there's good behavior and modest behavior on the part of human beings. So have a Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Chazak, chazak, v'nis chazak. And thank you for coming.
Saturday night.